Is there a problem? Elijah's voice was calm, too calm. The attendant straightened, her confidence faltering beneath his composure. No, sir, she replied quickly, but this line is reserved for premium guests. You may want to check with economy. A murmur rippled behind him. Passengers pretending not to watch, yet watching everything. Elijah slid his ticket back across the counter. It says first class. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of quiet that made the air feel heavier. She blinked, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course. There must be some system error. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. A manager appeared, older, polished, equally cautious. What seems to be the issue here? Elijah met his gaze. Apparently my seat offends someone. The manager's lips parted, but no words came. He checked the screen, nodded too fast, and muttered, Everything's fine. We'll get you boarded right away, Mr. Carter. But the room had already changed. People shifted, whispering. Some with sympathy, some with satisfaction. As Elijah picked up his boarding pass, his reflection flickered in the counter glass. Steady, unreadable. Narration drifted softly. Racism rarely shouts anymore. It smiles, corrects, and calls it procedure. The attendant lowered her eyes. Enjoy your flight, sir? Elijah paused. I intend to, he said quietly. But I hope you remember this moment longer than I will. He walked away, not in victory, but in silence that carried more power than confrontation ever could. Behind him, the whispering didn't stop. But for the first time, they weren't laughing. They were wondering, and that, he thought, was the first crack in their comfort. The click of a camera cut through the silence. Elijah didn't turn. He didn't need to. The world was already watching. It just didn't know what it was seeing yet. Sir, if you could wait here, the attendant said, motioning toward a small roped-off corner. Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it behind professionalism. Elijah stepped aside, his face calm, his movements deliberate. The passengers shifted uneasily, the kind of discomfort that comes when decency collides with fear of involvement. A man in a suit whispered, It's policy. Elijah's eyes met his. Policy or prejudice? No one answered. They didn't need to. Narration slipped in quietly. Injustice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles, scans your ticket, and calls it standard procedure. Security approached, polite, hesitant, trained to sound calm. Sir, we just need a brief verification. It won't take long. Elijah nodded. It never does. For you. The words lingered like smoke. Even the attendant froze, her confidence cracking. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone kept recording, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. Behind him, someone murmured, He's so composed. Another whispered, He's used to it. Elijah glanced toward the window, sunlight reflecting against the glass, blinding but pure. He breathed in, steady, then spoke softly, almost to himself. You spend years building calm because anger never fits the uniform they expect you to wear. The manager returned, papers in hand, voice lower now. Mr. Carter, everything checks out. You're cleared. Elijah smiled, a small, tired smile. Of course it does. He took his ticket back, his dignity unbroken, and walked past them all, leaving their silence heavier than his footsteps. The security officer hesitated before stepping forward, his badge catching the light. Sir, if you could please come with us, he said, voice formal but uncertain, the kind of tone used when authority begins to feel wrong. Elijah turned slowly. For what reason? The attendant's lips parted, then closed again. She didn't have one. Not one that would sound right under a camera's eye. Her voice cracked slightly. Just a quick check, sir. Routine. Elijah's gaze didn't waver. Funny how routine only looks like me. Silence. The kind that fills a room when truth walks in uninvited. Passengers shifted, unsure if they should record or look away. Someone lowered their phone, guilt flickering across their face. Narration. There are moments when racism doesn't shout. It whispers policy, protocol, professionalism. But every whisper still wounds. The officer cleared his throat, glancing at the crowd. "Let's step aside, sir, please." Elijah nodded, a slow exhale leaving his chest. "You're just doing your job," he said softly. "Even when the job breaks someone else's spine." That line hit harder than a shout. Even the air seemed to pause. The attendant looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Around her, other staff members stared, suddenly aware that this wasn't just about a seat anymore. As Elijah walked toward the inspection area, phones rose again, not out of curiosity but conscience. The hallway stretched ahead, long, cold, metallic, the kind of space where dignity was supposed to shrink. But his didn't. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked like a man who knew that every step was history catching up to itself. The two security officers walked beside Elijah, their uniforms stiff with duty, their silence echoing louder than the terminal's announcements. "Please come with us, sir," one repeated, voice low, almost guilty. Elijah didn't resist. He simply nodded, his calm a quiet rebellion in a place built on command. The crowd watched, half curious, half afraid to care. Phones hovered midair. No one spoke. Shame moved among them like unseen smoke. The attendant stood near the gate, pretending professionalism, but her fingers betrayed her nerves. "We just had to follow procedure," she murmured when he passed by. Elijah's reply was soft, almost tender. "You followed what you were taught. That's the problem." The line hung in the air, heavier than accusation. As the elevator doors closed, the reflection of the airline's shining logo caught his face, a symbol of the very empire he quietly owned. The irony didn't sting. It reminded him how power truly worked, calm, invisible, waiting. Down the hallway, the lights dimmed behind him, each bulb fading like a conscience folding under guilt. The security guards avoided eye contact, their authority unraveling under his silence. They thought they were escorting a man out of privilege, but they were escorting truth out of denial. Elijah didn't look back. He didn't need to. The moment was already history, recorded, shared, burning across every screen by the time he reached the car. He was calm. Too calm for a man humiliated, too quiet for someone wronged. Because silence in that moment was not surrender. It was the sound of power preparing to speak, in ways no one could mute. Long before the uniformed escort, there were rooms where Elijah was never truly invited, only tolerated. Conference tables gleamed like mirrors, reflecting faces that looked nothing like his. "You're impressive," they would say, "but not quite the image we're going for." The words carried perfume and prejudice, polished into professionalism. He'd smile then, not out of acceptance, but survival. At 27, he sat in a glass office, listening to another rejection wrapped in fake empathy. "We just need someone who fits our brand," the executive said. Elijah looked around the room, every portrait on the wall a reminder of what that brand meant. "You mean someone who fits your reflection," he replied quietly. The man shifted in his chair, unable to meet his gaze. That was the last interview Elijah ever attended. The years that followed were built in silence. Quiet nights, unpaid loans, and relentless belief. He learned that power doesn't shout. It compounds. Every insult became a ledger entry. Every door closed became equity in his resolve. When his company finally went public, he didn't celebrate. He signed the papers alone in his small office, staring at the same kind of contracts that once excluded him. "They'll buy my service before they ever see my face," he murmured. It wasn't bitterness. It was strategy, poetic justice wrapped in professionalism. Now, as cameras broadcast his name worldwide, the irony glows like a reflection in glass. The man they once called unfit owns the air they breathe. And still, he never raised his voice. He just let success speak the language they never learned. The glass tower stood higher than the clouds, but Elijah sat beneath none of it. He owned it, piece by silent piece. Carter Aviation Holdings, the name etched in steel, was just another mask worn by his empire. The same airline that once doubted his right to sit in first class now unknowingly served his command. Irony didn't scream. It breathed through every decision they made under his quiet control. "Next on the agenda," the chairman said, flipping through papers, "diversity inclusion. Again." The boardroom laughed lightly, a sound that used to sting but now only echoed against his patience. Elijah leaned back, listening, not speaking. The same words that once dismissed him now performed like theater. "We just need the right image," one member added. Elijah's eyes met his. "Image is everything, isn't it?" he said softly. The table stilled. Something in his tone bent the air, calm but unignorable. The others continued, unaware they were quoting reports funded by the man they once would have ignored in the lobby. Their voices blurred into background noise, replaced by Elijah's thoughts. "This isn't revenge. It's balance." After the meeting, one executive followed him out. "You're quiet today," she said carefully. Elijah paused at the window, watching a plane take off. "Quiet," he murmured. "Is how storms begin." She didn't ask what he meant. From his office, he could see the runway, the same kind of tarmac where his dignity was once inspected. Now every takeoff paid him tribute. The sky that once rejected him now rose at his command. And still, he said nothing. Power, he learned, doesn't need applause. It just needs memory. The video played on repeat. The moment he was told to step aside, the smirk, the glances, the silence that followed. It had gone viral overnight. Millions watched what the passengers had pretended not to see. In the private lounge, Elijah sat still, the glow from the screen reflecting off his calm expression. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger was too small for what he'd learned to control. His assistant, Maya, stood nearby, fidgeting with her phone. "They're calling for statements, sir. News outlets, talk shows, influencers. Everyone wants to know who you are." Elijah didn't look up. "Let them talk," he murmured. "Silence tells you who they are." She hesitated. "Some of the comments? They're calling you arrogant." He nodded faintly. "They called me invisible once. This is an upgrade." On the screen, a new headline flashed. "First Class Denial Sparks Global Debate." The airline's PR department released a polished apology. "All empathy, no ownership." Elijah chuckled softly. "Apologies are currency now. Spend enough and people forget what was stolen." Phones began buzzing in distant boardrooms. Executives whispered behind closed doors, their confidence cracking under public eyes. "Do we know who he is?" someone asked. No one did. Not yet. Maya turned off the TV. "Sir, what happens now?" Elijah rose, slow and deliberate, adjusting his cufflinks. "Now," he said, "we see who remembers dignity only after it trends." The world outside shifted restlessly. Hashtags rose, statements were drafted. But in that quiet lounge, the real storm gathered in silence, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. The truth, finally, had an audience. The world found out before sunrise. A leak, a whisper at first, then a storm. Confidential documents surfaced across every business channel. Carter Aviation Holdings, majority shareholder, Elijah Carter. By noon, the story consumed every screen. The same airline that had once escorted him away now scrambled to justify itself. Reporters shouted questions outside glass towers. Executives gathered behind locked doors, faces pale under fluorescent lights. "How long has he owned us?" one asked. "Long enough," another muttered, voice cracking. Their silence had built his empire. Now his silence dismantled theirs. In his office, Elijah watched it unfold, not with pride, but with peace. The world was finally catching up to a truth he'd carried quietly for years. His assistant entered hesitantly. "They're asking for a statement." He shook his head. "Let the paper speak. It never interrupts." As the headlines multiplied, memory seeped in. His father's hands, rough and tired, wiping airplane floors. "Son," he had said once, eyes glinting beneath old terminal lights, "don't fight to sit at their table. Own the table one day." Those words echoed now, not as revenge, but as rhythm, the pulse of everything he had built from silence. His phone buzzed. "A message from the airline's CEO. Can we meet privately?" Elijah typed slowly, his reflection faint in the screen's light. "You'll see me soon," he wrote, pausing before adding, "but not privately." He set the phone down, gaze steady, the same calm that once unsettled them now ruling the sky. Dignity had taken flight, higher than any plane they'd ever built. The room waited, as if air itself paused. Cameras clicked, but the flashes felt hollow. The CEO's practiced smile trembled. "Mr. Carter," he began, voice brittle, eyes darting, "we had no idea—" Elijah's gaze didn't waver. "That I was human? Or that I was your employer?" A ripple ran through the hall. Executives shifted uneasily, papers clutched like shields. One man muttered under his breath, "This isn't how it's supposed to happen." "Show them," Elijah said softly. Nodding toward the screens, a slide appeared, pay gaps, hidden terminations, microaggressions coded in performance reports. The room inhaled sharply, as if realizing air could betray them. "This," Elijah continued, voice calm, deliberate, "isn't about one man denied. It's about the system that believed it could decide who belongs, who deserves dignity, who remains invisible." The CEO swallowed. We meant no harm." "No harm," Elijah echoed. "Is it still harm if silence allows it to continue?" A secretary cleared her throat, looking anywhere but at him. A reporter whispered, phone raised, capturing every pause. "They built walls," Elijah murmured. "Walls that said I didn't belong. I didn't climb over them. I owned the foundation." Murmurs filled the edges of the room. Some executives stared at screens as if hoping the numbers would vanish. Others stared at Elijah, understanding too late that the calm he carried was the weight of history, of every dismissal, every ignored complaint, every subtle rebuke he had absorbed in silence. A pause settled. Cameras still clicked, but no sound seemed louder than the quiet he commanded. The CEO's hands shook. No one moved. Elijah simply stood, the embodiment of dignity reclaimed, the silence heavier than any threat, louder than any accusation. The hall was quiet, too quiet for the buzz of cameras and murmurs that usually filled it. Elijah's steps echoed softly, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of years spent unseen. He reached the podium, hands resting lightly, eyes scanning the room without flinching. "You denied me a seat because of my skin," he said, voice even, measured. "But the seat isn't the problem. The system is. And today I'm grounding the system, not the flight." A tremor passed through the room. Executives glanced at one another, unsure if they should speak or move. Phones rose, flashes clicked, but no one dared interrupt. From outside, control towers froze, pilots hesitated mid-call, and flights hovered in silence. Airports, usually roaring with engines and announcements, were hushed, as if the world itself had paused to listen. A hand trembled behind him, the staff member who had humiliated him. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know." Elijah didn't turn fully. "You never asked," he whispered. The screens behind him displayed schedules paused, maps frozen mid-flight, planes standing still on tarmacs. Journalists captured every still image, every twitch of unease on faces that had once wielded authority carelessly. He stepped down slowly, letting silence stretch, letting the weight of what had happened sink into the consciousness of everyone present. The world outside mirrored the pause. 12 hours of stillness, 12 hours of a sky bowed in quiet solidarity. Cameras followed him as he walked away. No victory gestures, no grand speeches. Just a man reclaiming dignity, leaving power humbled, letting the echo of restraint speak louder than any outrage. The lesson was quiet, unstoppable. When dignity commands, even the sky can kneel. Weeks passed, but the tension never fully lifted. Airports hummed again, flights moved, announcements resumed, yet something invisible lingered in the air, the weight of accountability. Boardrooms that once echoed with careless laughter now carried whispers, hesitant, unsure. "Have we really considered how we operate?" one executive asked, voice low. Another shook his head. "It's different now. The world is watching. Differently." In a quiet corner, the staff member who had humiliated him earlier packed her desk. She avoided eye contact, hands trembling over folders. I didn't realize," she murmured. No one answered. She walked away without a word. Resignation had become her silent apology. A press release arrived in inboxes. Formal, polished, empty of confrontation, heavy with the words they had learned too late. "We apologize for the incident and are taking steps to improve inclusivity," it read. Cameras captured it, but attention had shifted. The lesson wasn't in the text. It was in the absence of arrogance, in the visible pause of power. Elijah stood alone by the window of his office, sunlight tracing the lines of his calm face. "Apologies were written," he whispered to himself. But accountability lived in silence. No trending hashtags bore his name, but classrooms discussed his restraint, churches recited his words, and corporate leaders hesitated before speaking. A janitor passing by paused, noticing the man who once was invisible, now shaping the world quietly. Children in distant schools watched the clip again, copying his poise in classrooms, learning dignity. And for the first time, the world didn't shout over a black man's story. It listened. They didn't cheer. They reflected. They didn't applaud. They reconsidered. Silence, long overdue, had finally spoken, and it carried the sound of justice. Elijah stood in the soft morning light, the cemetery quiet, except for the distant roar of planes overhead. He lowered the small silver flight pin onto his father's gravestone, his hands steady though his chest felt heavy with years of remembered pain. "We finally own the table, Dad," he whispered. The words were more than a statement. They were a promise kept, a cycle closed. He traced the engraving with a fingertip, a brief smile breaking through the solemnity, before stepping back to look at the sky. Behind him, the wind carried memories, every boardroom rejection, every sideways glance, every muted insult that had fueled his rise. All those years, all that silence, he murmured under his breath. It wasn't wasted. His gaze lingered on the plains, soaring high, free, indifferent to the earthbound prejudices below. Somewhere, phones vibrated. Social media trembled with hashtags. Dignity can fly, grounded no more, echoing through classrooms, lecture halls, and living rooms. Students paused to replay the viral clip, whispering his words. The seat wasn't the problem. The system was. Each repetition stitched the lesson into a collective conscience, reminding a world that had grown comfortable with oversight, that accountability could arrive in quiet composure. A gentle breeze ruffled his jacket. He closed his eyes, imagining the hands of his father, polishing planes long ago, and the whispered advice that had stayed with him through every closed door. Don't fight to sit at their table. Own the table one day. Elijah breathed it in, letting it fill the silence around him. He straightened, looking at the horizon where sunlight caught the edges of ascending planes. There was no anger, no vengeance, only the still, unshakable presence of someone who had turned humiliation into history, who had reminded the world that dignity requires no applause. They refused him first class, but he taught the world what class really means, he murmured, a final note of triumph mingling with the wind, letting the sky itself carry the message upward.